Hello, I'm Bruce Ronaldson and I'm welcoming you to our exhibition of landscapes. I'm talking about my paintings, but there are a whole set of ideas I want to suggest to you about looking at painting, because for a lot of people the landscape is just an image, what I did on my holidays, and that's really not what this is about. It's about how we handle visual information and all sorts of different aspects like that. Although they are what I did on my holidays, because that's what I like to do. And one of the things is to travel to Provence, near Mont-Saint-Victoire, which is a sort of holy grail of many landscape painters, because that's where Cézanne worked. And this first picture is a quarry near the mountain. Now, you'll notice that all the frames are grey, and you may think that's a very odd colour. There is a reason for it. And that is because a painter friend of mine, Philip Richardson, and I went to Cézanne's studio, and it's as he left it pretty much, and the walls were grey, and you think, why grey? Well, the answer is this. Mondrian, very different kind of painter, red, black, yellow, blue, geometric paintings, wanted his to be unframed or on a white wall, because he wanted, as he said, the implications to travel across into the universe, which he hoped to change with his painting. If you think of stained glass, black lead compresses the picture and intensifies the colour. White expands outwards. What Cézanne was doing was just stopping it with a kind of a dull thud, so that whatever's around it does not affect the painting. I am also an art historian, so I'm very interested in how painting has been done through the ages. Now, this and all the paintings are rectangular, which is pretty normal, but we kind of take that for granted. But really, the rectangular painting came to its zenith in Renaissance times, because they were also dealing with perspective, which comes from a word which means to look through, and you're looking through the rectangle at whatever's happening in the painting. Now, the sheer geometry of this is that any line that is vertical or horizontal relates to the edge of the painting. That is important in terms of how you want it to look. Or you can have it deliberately off in order to put a certain kind of life into it. Now, when you get to Provence, it is so bright and hot. I was amazed. We used to camp 1 mile from Mont-Saint-Victoire, and in the middle of the day, the White Mountain was so bright you couldn't actually see it. And I realised when I was just doing a bit more before lunch, I was painting from memory and not what I was looking at. And actually the sound of the cicadas, which are the loudest in Europe with their place, makes your other senses, sense of hearing, completely go out of the window. And it was a kind of sheer sensation, and you understood why the Fauve painters, like Matisse, also were entranced by this really bright area. So this is a painting where you went in to the quarry. The colour of the soil was an intense red ochre, and it's all disused now, of course. And I just liked the pattern of the rocks, the red soil, and the distribution of trees in this really rocky landscape. The next one is elsewhere in France, and it's just a small sketch. I just sat there one day and started painting it, and I found there was lots to interest me in it. And I kept going back to this painting even when I was back at home in order to clarify ideas, so that you may notice here this ochreish colour is the field behind, but you're also aware of the texture of the paint, so that you know it's a flat vertical surface. And again, painting is very much about that. Now you're looking at a landscape. No, I'm not. I'm looking at flat paint. Right, well, this painting here is a fairly straightforward landscape near Pampelon, which is sort of near the Cevennes, and I literally stood in the field and painted it. It was wonderful weather, it was a wonderful scene, and because it was very light and hot, we don't have strong shadows in it. Everything is reflecting one thing into another. I often ask people how can they tell it's a French scene when I don't tell them. And actually, it all comes down to the church tower, which is not typical English at all, whereas everything else theoretically could be in England. Now, I say I just stood there and painted it, but I always come back and do some more. You do. You clear up little bits and pieces which need to be done, and somehow you pull it together as a picture. It doesn't take away from the spontaneity. In fact, the Impressionists, when they went out and painted pictures, only went out if they were sketching, with 9 colours or thereabouts. But back in the studio, or when they were in an established place, they would have considerably more. And in fact, Cézanne used 26 colours on his palette. That is quite a stretch and quite a big palette. This one, on the other hand, comes from Angles-sur-Angles, where I ran some residential courses, and it's called Sunken Boats, because all these skiffs all the way up here have actually been deliberately sunk to allow the planks to expand, and lying there, at different angles, they reflect different bits of the sky, and that's what attracted me. I used to hang over the bridge that I was standing on here with my students and ask them, when you look down, what do you see when you talk about water? Because you've got reflection, and you've got lily pads on there. That's the top of the water. You can then see fish, not in this painting, but you can see fish in the water, and you can see the bottom of the river. So actually, it's a mishmash of lots of different light effects that you're painting, and when you're in close focus nearby, it's rather different when you're looking at the distance. In the next 3 paintings, we see one more French landscape, which is put there for balance in the show, and then 2 smaller landscapes which actually probably show a little more progression in my ideas. This one was sitting again out in the landscape, looking down a hill and up towards a line of trees with a river in, through onto a field and a road running through there, and then going up the other side, the valley, where there are all sorts of different markings because of the different types of agriculture and so forth going on in there. And I was quite fascinated just by simple strokes necessary to make all that happen. And also the light peeking through of the paler field behind the bark of trees. So we're looking very much at brushstrokes. And a lovely skyline of silhouettes of trees and buildings through the picture. Now, this picture here is one in Essex, looking out from Felsted across Chelmer Valley. There's Felsted Mill in there somewhere, and it's autumnal, and it's been simplified down, all the different ploughed and stubbled fields, and the one that is much more yellow in the centre. And it's a sort of panoramic picture in itself. But I moved to the top one. You can begin to see some real changes because I wanted to question perspective. My painting is very influenced by my art history studies, which went into the development of perspective in the Renaissance, and the whole idea that it was actually quite a limited vision before it distorted if you took it further out than a 30-degree line of vision. And each of these frames, which are very carefully constructed and coloured to make the point that the rectangle is all important, makes each of these a window. The Italians talk about perspettiva, which means looking through onto life. And instead of just looking through in a perspectival way, there are distortions, making a pattern of the white railings down to the slightly lower level there. And also, in particular, the curve round of the horizon. Now, it is true to say that if you go beyond what perspective can take in, the 30 degrees, you will tend towards a fisheye lens. But this wasn't trying to be a fisheye lens. It was my saying, I want more in this picture than I can get. And that includes the sea and the groins. So I just moved it round in that way. And this is also what happens if you're painting a picture and you say to yourself, what happens if I turn over here or over here? Estate agents, of course, tend to take photographs that show the beautiful house without widening the perspective to show the abattoir on the left and the sewage works on the right. So the cropping of what goes on beyond the picture has some bearing to your experience of where you are. And from that I started other experiments like walking into the landscape, still drawing, and seeing what happened. But it's not done by rules, it's done much more impetuously and intuitively, seeing how I could space things to bring in other details that were part of the atmosphere, but not necessarily purely photographic, straight-on image. This one, unlike the one I was talking about before, is virtually without any horizontals or verticals in, which is what makes it dynamic. It is an aerial view of Berkhamsted Castle in Hertfordshire, well worth visiting, which is a complex castle that already existed when the English formally surrendered to William the Conqueror. And I've done paintings inside the castle, and it's all sorts of interesting views, but I wanted one to show this kind of broken curtain walling going around the picture, the dynamic double moat and various other features, and the cutting in of a road which had a more modern building in and a bit of foliage, and exaggerating all this stonework with bright blue shadows. So that's how this particular one came about. And then we come to the last two pictures, and you can see how ideas are changing. These used to appear, long, thin pictures, on wedding chests, which was where the newlywed kept all her linen. And on the illustrated panel, you would tend to get a procession or a story progressing through the picture. Here, I have a landscape of a place called Hale, just outside St Ives in Cornwall. And there are various things I wanted to include in the picture. It sort of tells you how Hale works rather than looking particularly like Hale. And this is Hale Quays, the industrial part that goes on way down here somewhere. And here is the original railway and the even older original main road into Cornwall, which used to be without dual carriageways, without a bypass, very slow movement through here. And you can imagine it took an awful long time to get through. The railway was faster in those days, and Brunel just built a viaduct diagonally across a Georgian square and straight into an Iron Age fort, which I think is quite extraordinary. You could say vandalistic, but actually I love the juxtaposition. It's the idea that there is history and it's constantly moving. Hale doesn't look like anything like this today. And so we follow the line of the railway, it takes us over to Penzance. We take the branch line round and we get to St Ives, St Peter's Chapel on the end there. We've taken the sea down that way, of course, so it's at right angles. The sky goes at right angles around the corner here. And I love the railway lines because they are a linear movement within the picture, as are the road and the terrace of houses that takes us along here, over a swing bridge, by the way. And we're watching the loading of a ship, and the channel goes down to the sea here. These two pools fill with water at high tide and are cut off by sluices and then released at low tide so that it scours out the river and making it navigable all the time. Now, I began to realize that you could put things into a picture that you couldn't actually see, certainly not looking in one direction entirely. And I remember a time of great frustration when I was painting a straightforward landscape of St Ives roofs. Always sounds like a nice romantic idea. And suddenly realising, oh, I've left off a shed there, or there should be 3 windows in there, and getting utterly frustrated and thinking to myself, why am I doing this? And then, on reflecting on a catalogue of Alfred Wallace, a primitive painter discovered by Ben Nicholson and Christopher Wood, that he could paint a picture of a boat in St Ives Harbour or whatever, and then have a little corner of the picture with 3 childishly drawn houses with the words St Ives written across it. That's all you actually need. The information is there. If it is visually nice, but nothing to do with the photographic image, it's still visually entitled to be in that picture. So I started to introduce elements which could be understood from maps and from old prints and from photographs and from plans and any old ephemera in a way that added to the composition. Suddenly that little red pill that means a railway station in the Ordnance Survey, and then a black and white dotted line coming down for a single track railway, for instance, is very visual, very beautiful, and linear for taking you to places. So here we've got white houses, but here we continue on the North Cornish coast path with white dots taking you across the picture. And we are in Pentuan Harbour. Way up out of the top left of the picture is the clay deposits that you found around St Austell. And there was a narrow gauge railway that brought the clay all the way down to the harbour, where there'd be a waiting ship to fill, and that would have to wait there because the tide will have gone out, held by a lock. When it filled up again, you open the lock gates, and off it goes all the way to Liverpool, from Liverpool through to the potteries to deliver the clay. And we've got the extension of one of the, this is the boundaries of one of the pieces I was working off, but there are others being used as well. One sheet I had written in the corner, scrawled in the corner by someone, highest point to which ordinary tides flow, and I thought I would include that as a sort of half-readable piece of writing. If it's too readable, it may take too much of your attention. Up here are actually the bottom halves of the letters Pentuan, which is the place from the map, but it's quite difficult to read something only by the bottom half of the letters. And so it is, everything goes in to create the overall illusion. And it makes you aware that a painting can have all sorts of information added to it. I actually studied at Newcastle, where before my time we had Richard Hamilton as one of the lecturers. And if you look at the work for which he became famous in the 60s and 70s, he would have all sorts of things added into his pictures. And I suddenly saw a link there as well. Well, I hope you enjoyed looking at these pictures. I certainly enjoy painting them and will continue to do so.